Water District, Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020. And in accordance with MRSA 405-6E, for consultation with legal counsel, we're going to start off by going into executive session.
So moved.
Moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
All approved? All in favor? All opposed? Jason, you're in favor?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are now in executive session.
Hold on just a second, we gotta get the video out.
Okay, we are back. All right, next item on the agenda, we would approve the minutes of, so I would, before we get into all these next agenda items, we got some sort of standard regular ones, and we're, in order to respect everybody's time, that I'm thinking unless somebody has something specific, Mike, normally you'd give us a little more of a report, Tanya, unless you have an like something you think we need to know about. Everybody's had these things, can we? Yeah, we'll, that's all right.
Sid mentioned to pare down the report, only bring up anything that's emergency.
That's great. So, we can approve the minutes without Sid being here, I think, can we?
Well, I
Oh, you got it.
question about that. At just the very end of the meeting, we closed that Trustee Paulina and Titus would like the budget analysis to include blah, blah, blah. I added after that the mention of the mayor's request. It's on this agenda, on old business. I added a suggestion that we consider, it was just a statement, a suggestion that we consider potentially sharing the cost of a study. That was something I mentioned, it wasn't noted, I just wanted to make sure that was tapped onto it.
Okay. All right, that's for added on the minutes. Anybody else?
So let's start, I move the acceptance of the minutes.
Okay.
A second?
Now it's a discussion. And Jason's comment comes in discussion.
Okay. All right, let's take a vote to approve the minutes.
Do we approve
All in
the
favor?
amendment?
Yep, with the amendment. Okay. All in favor?
I-
All against? Okay. 7-0. Financial report to Tanya.
The water gallons sold is down about 5.5% year to date. This results in approximately $90,000 lower than anticipated with the rate increase. Expenses are trending very well. You can see overall the expenses are totaling $19,000 under budget. Cash on hand at the end of the month, at the end of June, was $1 million. And again, the aging receivables are creeping up. The PUC has requested comment to reinstate disconnections. That closes at the end of the month, so we're hoping for a quick turnaround from them. Stimulus reimbursement, we do qualify for some stimulus reimbursement. We are waiting for an estimate on some office renovations that they're going to have to be doing at the UV plants before we can submit that. We will do that when we get it. And the approval of the audit.
Just a question, Paul. Are you approving the audit first, or? I don't know, are you trying to do it all at once? I have some questions on the financial.
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple of questions. One of them is I noticed, and forgive me, I don't have my laptop here, so I don't have previous agendas, but I'm looking at the capital projects.
Yep,
And I see a lot of zeros.
yep.
Is that something we decided to do, we're going to be able to do some projects and we zeroed them out, or were they zero from January 1st?
When we put those capital projects in the budget for consideration, wasn't part of the approval, those were projects we were considering. As you remember, when the COVID hit, we cut $400,000 right out of the,
The capital
That's
improvement.
what
So
those
that's-
are.
So we should
Yes.
consider, I wish we'd left it in the budget area and just cut out.
Yep,
the,
it just left it this year. We
actual
can
or
definitely
something,
do that, yeah.
Because I kind of was at a loss to see all those
Yep.
zeros. So my other question relates to gross payroll is up, according to our report here.
Yes.
So I guess maybe this is a too lengthy of a question to ask, but we're spending more on payroll, but we're doing half of the capital projects.
Correct, because capital
We have
labor,
our own people doing capital projects, so I understand, I mean, we don't do other things, but one of the main things they do.
but when they work on a capital project, it goes to that project.
Okay,
And we were pretty slow to start capital projects this year.
right, so we have.
So
we
more
have to charge-
labor.
Right,
is-
so that time, that labor's gone, we can't get it back, once the time has gone by, that, we can't just go, they can't recoup those, employee hours, unless we're gonna work overtime to catch up. So if they weren't working on capital projects, and there were 9,000 over so far, does that mean that this number, gross payroll should stay the same whether it's been moved to capital projects or not? Gross payroll, I want it to be gross payroll, regardless if it got moved to a capital project or transferred part of it over the sewer, or whatever the reason is. So I guess I had the question is, we've had half of our pipe replacement, not going to do. And our gross payroll was 9,000 over.
It's because more is getting charged to maintenance work because of the pandemic.
Right, so we're still keeping people, just not replacing pipe. So our people are there, doing
It's
other
not-
things.
Right, it's not being charged to the
So
capital.
that's kind of a loss in a loss, because we want to do 2 miles of pipe and not be able to, but we're still going to spend the money, at least on the employee part of it, anyway. To me, that causes a little, not as much of an issue, but something we should be aware of, that's concerning.
Was that going on at sewer too yesterday, or did
Yeah.
you find the same?
Yeah, not as bad, because we had a more zealous project, that's one. But I mean, that goes back to, I mean, if we were hiring it all out in a perfect world, and we couldn't afford to, so we'd say, you guys stay home, we wouldn't be paying that out. Because we fund our own pipe replacement. If we don't put pipe in the ground, we're still paying everybody. And labor's got to be 75% of the cost. 25% materials or whatever, 10%. So I just see it as something's concerning this year, that we're gonna have the same payroll or more, or the same budget, but we're gonna lose at least a mile of pipe. Or more, because we're right now projecting to do 440, almost 500,000, which I thought was $1 million a year. So $1 million a mile of pipe average. This is a rough number. So if our forecast is half a million, that's even less pipe, going down to less than 5. COVID's gonna be over pretty soon, and we still can get going, put stuff in the ground between now and the time the ground is frozen, so I guess I don't understand.
One thing I want to make sure was not lost in Tina's report. The gallons sold down right now it's 5.5% lower. When our budget, if you look at our budget number, it looks good, but that was predicated and approved prior to our rate increase.
Yeah, the rate increase helped make up some, and that's kind of sad too, because it's still lost money.
Because
It's still a ton of lost money. So
It is.
You can't feel as though,
It's
oh, we're
approximately
okay because we put a.
With the sales down 5.5%, that's not putting us where we had projected to be when we put the rate increase in place.
Yeah, so we got, that's another.
I just want to make sure that wasn't.
Well, I'm not
that
talking
point
about
wasn't
that,
lost.
the
Right.
expenses, the payroll, gross payroll, is something that they have nothing to do with rates. And how much we're gonna put in the ground this year has nothing to do with rates. Or it did, we actually put a rate increase in because we were gonna increase it 2 miles.
Right.
So how much pipe are we putting in the ground this year?
I think when it's all said and done, with some creative construction, I think we'll be putting well over a mile anyway.
Well, yeah.
Jason had a question?
Yeah, Andy, further to your comment though, we're replacing less pipe, but we're doing more maintenance.
Well, we're
We're
using.
doing more maintenance than we would have done had we.
The labor's not being allocated as much to capital.
It's not being allocated to a full maintenance account.
And that's a basic algorithm here, right? That's how we
We have to put the
handle.
payroll somewhere, so if we're not putting pipe in the ground, we're keeping all the employees, so we're
Exactly.
putting it over somewhere else.
Exactly.
And I understand that, but this board needs to be aware.
Right.
that This is what's happened here. So
With
we're
that
not able to
maintenance
put
not
pipe in the
being
ground,
done.
We're still paying everything, the same expenses go merrily on, but we're not, this year, we're.
So with that maintenance, the question is then, what would have happened to that maintenance had the capital, I think, is to.
Right, we were busy
take
putting
one-
pipe in the ground, what
Right.
happened to that?
Is that, what happens to that maintenance? Is that routine maintenance?
We're not doing any maintenance right now that we wouldn't have been doing if we didn't have COVID. We just get into
to it sooner, because we're not doing capital projects.
So you're doing-
In the past, when we have projects going on, our maintenance gets pushed off, and I wind up with long laundry lists of things we need to do when we get done working on X street. But right now, we're hammering that stuff out as the calls come in, or we have a leak or a hydrant that's broken, we're jumping right on it, and we're
So it's the stuff you would do like.
it's stuff we
once-
would have done anyways.
Eventually.
Eventually, after you can't put pipe in the ground
Correct.
anymore. Right, so
Right.
now what's gonna happen,
Eventually,
when we
we'll
can't
let
put
it-
pipe in the ground? And all this work that normally that's when you would do work then.
Well, the good news is we still have lots of pipe to put in the ground. We still have lots of projects we're planning to do the rest of the summer. And we haven't been doing as many because, as Kenny said, we got to a late start.
Yeah.
So maybe some of these numbers will even out. Again, we're not gonna be doing as much capital because we did cut 400,000 out. You know, so we're not doing as many main projects, but we still have a bunch. We were just doing a bunch of sewer projects. We're gonna be switching over and doing several main projects, so.
So would it be true that a low number would be $1 million a mile or 800,000? I know that they're dependent on ledge, I know there's all kind of variables, but there's gotta be some sort of,
Well, $100 a foot is what we generally carry, and it's 5,200 feet a mile. So you're looking at $500,000 per mile. So $1 million for 2 miles.
Not 200,
Well, as I'll get into later, once we start gearing up and doing more, the
Cost is
cost of actually goes up, but we have to stretch the resource and maybe contract more out.
case in point, the work, mains on Fern, Holly, and Jocelyn, the work that our people are doing on those, is that capital or labor?
It's capital.
That's capital, that's what I thought it was, because they're, long shops are laying the pipe, and we're doing all the rest, the connections and the backfill and the.
Yep.
I just wanted to make a point, that's all.
It's a good point. I mean, there's certain,
We have,
to my business mind, what I'm hearing, a couple things that we just have talked about, but we want to keep paying attention to. One is what's happening to revenues. And the other is our fundamental way of operating at this time is to keep a workforce together. We pay them salary, you know, they're in a maintaining, and in an odd period like we had, odds, strange, it hardly defines it. But we were keeping people employed. We are cut capital, and we normally would cost shift them over capital, but now they're on our basic operating budget, and that's how the finances here currently are working. And that's how you keep a skilled workforce on deck, because they work for us.
And that was a conscious decision because we
Right.
decided a few meetings ago
Keep them
to
going.
let this pandemic ride out and see how our finances are looking. We didn't want to just dive into
well, the
all of our
idea-
capital work without knowing what our finances are.
And my concern is I want to make sure that we're staying productive if we can, because we can't stop the expenses. It doesn't matter what comes in.
Because we're paying for
The
it.
expense is still there whether we're putting pipe in the ground or not. At least 75%. 75% of our putting pipe in the ground is labor, 25% is materials. And we're still paying 75% whether they're putting pipe in the ground or not. It doesn't matter how much money is coming in. So I just want us to be aware of that, so. I think it's very important to watch that. Hopefully we can play some catch up here. So,
Yeah, so is the revenue is up or down, even with the 5% reduction in water based on, so did the revenue stay even?
The revenue is down about $90,000 from what we anticipated.
even with the rate increase,
Yes.
it would have been a lot worse without them.
Correct.
And again, the budget you see here was formulated before the rate increase went into effect.
Yeah.
So that kind of skews where we should
Okay.
technically be.
Any other questions or now for Tanya on that?
On financial or audit?
Now we're on the audit.
Okay, we want to, first, we were just going to mention what's going on with the 90 days past due, make sure everybody's aware that
Yep, 90 days
we're seeing a lot of, a huge increase.
has about doubled over the past 4 months, and the 120 days has about increased by a third.
What's that total dollar amount?
The total dollar amount is
Now you get almost 16,000.
about $30,000.
Total between the two? Correct.
I've been signing a lot of liens, so we are going through the process of putting liens on, but we can't put the disconnect on it. We are putting liens on. You know, you say we are getting some people that are paying once they have a lien on it, they're paying at that point, so that's a little bit of help.
Yeah.
That's something right now we can't control until we get some direction from DEC or governor or both. How we collect.
Okay. So we've got the audit that we need to approve.
Move the approval of the audit.
Second.
Okay, now we've got discussion.
Which is a couple of items. One of them that I mentioned at the water district was, I just want to make sure that we're looking at the assets that we depreciate every year, that pipe replacement or infrastructure replacement is part of those assets, all of it. Even though it's a combination of labor and materials, we need to make sure that it's going to have a confirm that when we spend $500,000 on pipe replacement, that it goes right into that as an asset, even though it's a need.
Yes.
And I'm also going to make the point that we should think about putting in benefits as part of that. So we talked about that before, that any company you hire to do it, we're going to charge you for the employees plus their benefits. You're going to pay for the whole bill. You're not going to pay the bill to have lawn chance to do something that's minus the employee benefits. You know the bill you get from them. So I just want to make sure that that's maybe going to confirm with me, I guess, or somebody was that we're doing that.
It is, yes.
It is.
Yep, we charge all labor to our capital projects and that gets moved over.
Labor and materials
Yes.
and everything.
Correct.
It gets
Yeah.
charged to the company.
Correct.
Okay, but the other thing I wanted to get an explanation on, and I saw where it's in, that there's an explanation in the audit, but it's legally, so I'd like to have the round down, where it talks about on the front page of the audit, there's some changes made. It says subscribe to note 1, financial statement, the water district has changed accounting policies related to government standards based on GASB. Statement number 83, certain asset retirement obligations. Item 84, which was fiduciary activities. Next one was number 88, certain disclosures related to debt, including direct borrowing and direct placements. And the last one was majority equity interest. I just want to get a boiled down explanation of what we were doing. I read it from here, but it's a lot of legalese. So what does that mean?
We did not make any changes
It says
to our
change.
process. We did to our audit reports. That is it, with how the auditors see it, but we made no changes to our processes at all.
So this was kind of a confusing statement.
The audit, you can see how they present.
Well, we just said that this
doesn't,
impact has no impact on the financial statements, but it's a
So,
policy.
right.
The idea of fiduciary activity, what does that
It's
mean?
kind of like a company who has their tax reporting and then they have their
Yeah.
financial statements. It's no different.
Right, well,
We have
one
our
of
audit statements
One
and
of the
we
things I
have,
saw with fiduciary activities had to do with our obligations to benefits. Benefit package. So if we've made a change in how we handle our fiduciary responsibilities to retirees, or how we handle pension plans, I think.
we did not make any changes.
So we haven't made the change, but the auditor,
They're saying that we
the
did.
last time they audited us, made a change to the way they,
We made a change. She said if we, the Auburn district, water district, changed accounting policies related to government accounting standards, but these changes had no impact on this financial statement.
Correct.
But it tells me that a policy change was there. I just wanted to, it was a change, but why did they put it in there when they made policy change?
what is the change?
Yeah, well, I saw what the change was, but again, it's legalese, so I just want to get an explanation.
All right, anybody else? Okay. Do we get a vote, Pat, to approve the financial audit? All in favor? All opposed? They passed unanimous.
One thing I'd like to bring up very quickly, I brought this up because it was on the sewer as well as water. We fund our workers' comp and partnership has the insurance pool through the municipal. Every year, they review their accounts and they square up at the end of the year. This year, the water district, we just received a couple days ago, a check for $3,685. They commended us for good risk management, sound loss prevention, and that really is a tribute to our safety program we have. Our injuries are very, knock on wood, very, very low. Our property damage, very, very low, so that's the biggest rebate that I've ever seen us receive. Sewer district at around 3,200, again, the water district at 3,685. What I would like to do, this is something we didn't expect, was coming and came. I would like to entertain if we could take $350 out of that $3,685 check and sponsor a employee luncheon and possibly maybe a jacket or a shirt or something that explains, has our logo, says something about, recognizes their city work. When I brought this to the sewer trustees last night, they approved it $350 from sewer. I was hoping $350 from water would be donated towards that, so we could honor the employees.
I think it's a wonderful idea.
Anybody have a problem with it?
I heard yesterday's discussion, and I think we should say up to $500, just in case, you want
Instead of
Up to-
350, up to
Up to
500.
500. If we can do it for 350, better, but
What you
up
said.
to 500, I think that's good. Everybody in favor of that?
Okay.
Everybody have a problem?
I move.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Okay, yep, you're good down, that's it.
Okay, good, thanks.
Okay, open
Please
session.
thank everybody. I mean, you don't get that without everybody at every level being careful, doing things right and safely. I know you create that environment, but then people need to also do it, so please, I would hope the other trustees by consensus would agree to express their appreciation to everybody for the good work that makes that possible.
Okay, we're on to open session.
I don't ratify.
Can I move we just ratify the bills?
Was that in
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed. That was, we did, we all approved it.
No, that was the audit.
That was the audit,
Okay.
number 4?
Ratify the payment of bills.
Move to ratify the payment of bills.
Yep, second, all right, discussion. Anybody have any issues?
Just one, real quick. I noticed a lot of Prescott bills in here, so it begs the question that I had raised 3 years ago. When we bought the inventory, at one time we had a consignment inventory with Prescott, I understand.
Right.
And we turned around and we
Moved
thought it
away
was
from
more
that.
efficient to buy it and not have to worry about consignment inventory. Shows that our inventory on the audit showed $116,000 in inventory. And I would assume that that's high, probably. It seems like that's gone up. I mean, one of the ideas of having a consignment, you don't have to worry about carrying costs for inventory because they did it. Well, we did get a discount for having taken it over. But at the same time, we were gonna try to keep our inventory. $116,000 seems like a lot of money to have on hand if we're going to be paying for this stuff. Unless there is a really big stuff.
I don't know if that's something we can.
The audit should show what we had 1 year previous.
It doesn't, though, it just shows that.
Can we ask to have that, and so you could look that up and maybe give us an explanation next meeting?
Yep.
All right, so let's put that, we can take a note on that, do that, just to keep things moving. Anybody else have any questions or concerns about the bills? Okay, let's have a vote to ratify the payment of the bills. All opposed?
I'll abstain.
Okay. So that's 601. Activity report, open session. Anybody here? We don't have anybody here, so open session is closed. Activity report.
All right, I'll
Mr.
be
Brockman.
very brief. We'll talk about some stuff, project updates, your activity report. Again, we're in the busy time of year. We've been very busy. You see the service work we've been doing. Names, we've been on projects, and we did have a little bit of had a problem down at the end of Broadview at the Auburn Housing Authority's apartments there. We were going down to fix a small leak on our side of the service. They wound up having 2 major water breaks within their facility on their side of the service boxes, which major is a key word because it just devastated the parking lots and walkways. And we wound up getting involved in that and working with them, but we will be charging for our time and labor and doing that without something they agreed to with us. So that's the biggest thing worth mentioning out of the activity report. Unless anyone has questions.
Anybody have any questions on the activity report? Okay. Do we need to approve that? Or that's just, okay, all right?
Oh, I just had one question real quick, Steph. There was a block trail on Townsend Brook Road property, that's something we did with other activities.
And that's stuff we charge out for watershed.
So block the trail for that reason, or?
It was just a private property issue, and they were just riding ATVs on watershed property, so we don't allow that. So we just blocked it, put up some signage.
Is that a winter trail or just a summer problem?
It's just an old logging road, I guess you'd call it a winter, I don't know what you define a winter road as, but it's an old logging road that they were just utilizing.
All right, so we're on to new business. All right, first item on new business, cost apportionment for gull management contract.
You mind if I kind of set this, I know Steve, you recommended that be on this agenda. If I could just kind of back up and kind of paraphrase where we are and how we are where we are. Yes? As you remember, the last meeting we had, there was discussion, there was a vote taken 5-2 to contact the USDA through the city of Lewiston to be party to the gull contract. I did contact the city of Lewiston, they checked with USDA. They came back that they did not enter into three-party agreements. So that, I checked that, they reported that back to the trustees. Just going back to the emails that went back and forth, I know that, Steve, you did email Kevin Gagne. This letter is to advise you Auburn trustees are not in agreement with the 50% cost share for the USDA gull harassment contract. The elected members of the Auburn City Council passed a resolution instructing the Auburn Water District trustees to ensure fair act and practices for Auburn ratepayers. As president of the Auburn trustees, it's my responsibility to carry out the desire. Instruct you that by signing the agreement, the USDA does not guarantee a 50% cost share by the Auburn ratepayers. I know that when Lewiston received that, the gull contract expired July 1st. They did not sign the contract. There was no gull management occurring because the USDA had no contract. July 14th, Lewiston did decide to sign that contract because without gull management going on in the lake, they were jeopardizing drinking water supply. So that contract has been signed. The USDA is going forward with their gull management program. I just wanted to bring everyone up to date on where we are now, where the whole thing is. So it is occurring. So I just wanted to set the stage for any discussion that goes on with the contract. You want to take it from there?
No, that's good to know. I know we have, and I guess there's some question on whether or not we approved that we didn't want to pay 50%.
Did not. That motion was withdrawn.
Okay.
And all you have to do is watch the video. The motion was withdrawn, and the motion that Andy made and I seconded was that the motion we asked to be included in the contract, and that there be no discontinuation of the service. And so I do think it's important to note that your email to Kevin was incorrectly done. It misrepresented the motion, and in fact, at this time, subject to any future work we may do together as a board, in fact, we have not changed the current interlocal agreements according to, that relate to water quality. So while there may be some trustees who are looking to change that cost sharing formula, until more work is done, which I think we had learned a little bit more about how it could get back on an agenda. But at this time, there has been no board vote to agree to make those changes or to even initiate those changes. So I would like to be on record as saying that the 5-2 vote was to try to get onto the contract as a third party. We did not know at that time that they weren't going to do that at the USDA, and that we did not want any discontinuation of the service. Therefore, it would seem to me that our current situation is one in which we need to continue with the Gulf management contract according to the 50-50 rules until such time as this board agrees to change the cost-sharing discussion. Because that's what we moved and voted. That was the 5-2 vote. So we may have a future agenda item where we want to bring back cost sharing onto it.
It's on the agenda right now.
It is, and it's a very, are you finished, Mary? Very specific vote about being a party to the contract, which I think was the specific, the intent behind it. And my personal position, realization that we're not a party to that contract and it falls under the interlocal agreement is not enough. I'd like to just be on the contract. That's where I stand. So legality, can we change it right this second? I don't know. Next year,
That we can't.
we can't have our own contract individually?
Well, we can, but we want to.
What are our options?
We want to pay the whole bill.
No, thank you.
So we still have to talk to Lewiston about how we're going to pay. We can have our own
So
contract.
we can't be on the same contract, so now we're talking about cost apportionment. That's how we're
Until we
going to
change it.
Well,
So I
just to clarify, we're on a contract.
We're not.
We're not.
We have no
So
obligation.
There's no
to pay that.
obligation. That was my point. There's no connection between, it's understood, assumed that we're handshake agreement, or is it specifically under that interlocal?
It is.
Our obligation goes back to the 1999 agreement where we agreed to share water protection efforts on an even basis.
That they have a specific contract that we're not a
Well,
part
they're
of.
just providing.
For water protection, it's with, they hold the contract, and its intent is to protect Lake Auburn.
Go ahead, Dan.
Steve, so in June, we used 36% of the water. And that means Lewiston used 64% of the water. So I'm going to motion that we pay up to 40% of this new Gulf management contract for this year, which would be fat compared to 36% is what we're using. So that's the motion. For this year, we pay up to 40% of this new contract from July 1st to next July 1st. So at least we can send a message to Lewiston that we are interested in continuing to pay for this and to keep our lake clean, but up to 40%.
Is there a second?
Well, I mean, I'll second for the purpose of discussion.
Okay, now we have discussion.
But my point on that is we have an agreement. So it's like any agreement, we can't back out. Unfortunately, the agreement is there. I don't like it, but we did it and we signed it and it's in force. So like any agreement, if you decide, well, no, we're going to pay less, then all we're doing is saying we're going against our word. It was done. I like the idea. I'm not against the idea, but I just don't think we can go against it. I think we have an agreement that says 50-50. Somebody could show me that there's some latitude and flexibility in that agreement, then I'm all in favor of sending a notice saying, no, we're going to pay no more than 40%. But there isn't. It says 50%. So we're going to say, well, against that, and there was no sunset on that agreement. There was no biannual or annual review of that agreement, which is, I don't know why they did it that way, but it's an ironclad agreement that we're stuck with until we can find a way to change that agreement. We got to change that agreement somehow. Does that mean we bring the parties to the table and say, we need to renegotiate this whole agreement? Yes, and let's see if we can get that done, which will affect everything, not just this one issue. Because we'll be sitting here talking about every issue that comes up, item by item, if we don't change that agreement. That's key, in my opinion.
Back then, we had two parties trying to have a common goal to protect the lake, but share the responsibilities equally. There was no reason to say, gee, you use 45% of the water, you use 55. if you wanted to ever push something through like 60/40, you're gonna have to have a commission or set of overseers to say, how do we share the apportionment? And you might be changing it every month based on some formula, like water, or sewage treatment plant does.
Well, that's another discussion that wouldn't be
But in order to say, we're gonna arbitrarily go 60/40, 42%, 58, you gotta have a mechanism how to judge that. And ultimately, we just said 50/50, let's keep it simple on stuff that is fairly low cost. On capital stuff, then we go with who needs what part, but to change it from 50/50, there's just all kinds of unknowns in
How
that.
could you consider $100,000 low cost? $80,000 for alum treatment, $20,000 for burn mitigation. That's just two little
Alum treatment,
agreements.
we could have addressed when we were doing the agreement. We did not call out anything other than 50/50 except in the rearview mirror. Going forward, you can make those discussions, but you're trying to change stuff that was.
Oh,
I'll withdraw my motion. And can we make a motion to
Well,
go
I think the
forward?
motion has to be that we ask staff to look at the possibility, or look at renegotiating that particular, or revisiting that agreement. And
I second that.
If the other party has no intention of wanting to, we are
Where's
still
that
stuck.
on the agenda?
It's what's holding us up on cost apportionment.
It's the only way that we can fix it.
But I don't-
It's right there, cost apportionment
For goal management.
for
But
everything.
that's part of the contract, that's part of this. But what's governing this
I see.
item is the 50/50 agreement we have on water quality and
I
expenses.
remember in a recent meeting, we brought up that it's the 99 memorandum of understanding on these sorts of things. And you said, did you email that out to us?
Yep.
You did?
Should all
Okay.
have a copy.
Yep.
But that's what we have to do. If the other party does not want to listen to it, they should slam the door in our face. And we have no choice. We signed an agreement, and we have to adhere to it. It's an ironclad agreement until both parties want to sit down.
Until Jim Prost tells us how we can get out of it.
Well, the only way we can get out of it is to go to the other party, just like any contract. You have a contract with somebody, you got to go to the other party and ask them, would you be willing to renegotiate this because we have this reason X, Y, and Z? If they want to say, be hardball and say no, we have no choice.
Every month I meet with the Lewiston officials, because they're our partners in the water supply and water distribution, so I'm in contact with them a lot. And I meet with Kevin and Gagne, who's their water superintendent, Dale Dowdy, and they're aware of these discussions that are going on here. I mean, these are public meetings, they see them, they see the recordings, they know the discussions we've had, and I've discussed this with them. And they know that these larger discussions are coming, and they are open to talking with us about these issues. It's
There
not
we
as if
go,
they're
that's what we
sitting-
need to do. So I would think that the motion should be, I make a motion that we ask staff to contact the other party, this is Lewiston Water District, and ask them if we can talk about renegotiating the 1999 agreement. Not specifically about anything in just the entire agreement should be put in. And then, of course, we can, when we have a discussion, once we have it on the agenda, we can talk about it, what we want to change, just like we're doing it with the bylaws.
Well, I'd second that motion.
By staff, you mean Sid.
By, well, Sid, whoever he wants to go with him, I would assume he's going to want the president of the water district to be involved in that initial
Treasurer.
conversation.
So now that we've had a second, we can discuss that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it would be very easy on a yearly basis. You can look at the water and say, if Auburn has tremendous growth and all of a sudden now we're 60/40, I mean, that's what we're opening the door, that's how that works. So, I mean, you could put in, and I think that's a healthier relationship than just,
So, in the spirit of the discussion, what I heard Andy say is to begin by asking to have the
So have a
conversation.
meeting with them and say, would you
And to
be
have
willing
it as
to
a conversation,
renegotiate this?
a respectful partnership conversation.
Right.
And when we come in that spirit, and I like the way you and I think about these kinds of things, because I think that this is a long time important partnership that we have. in behalf of two communities and the people who depend on us collectively for drinking water. And the lake is the resource for that. And I think asking if there is a opening for a conversation about the interlocal agreements in that spirit is very respectful and very appropriate. And it may well be that there are areas of agreement without throwing the whole interlocal agreement out, that we could explore. And I sometimes think I hear in some of the conversations I'm hearing that there might be, there's some new people involved in water. Dale's newer to this than.
Dale's out, he's managing now, right? Assistant deputy director.
Assistant city.
So we'll have a new guy there. Do you know who they chose?
No, they,
All right,
no,
so-
they have not.
My point being that there are some new people involved in this. It may be a productive conversation, and I would encourage us to approve this motion in that spirit.
Just to clarify, it's not to ask them to have the discussion. I think that's an important distinction, because you said, Sid just mentioned, they know this discussion is coming. I think we need to have the discussion.
Repeat your
I'll repeat my
motion.
So
motion.
that's the only distinction I would make is to.
I'm
My
not here.
motion is to instruct staff, and with the presidents involved as well, that we go and contact them to see if they are interested in renegotiating or discussing 1999.
So that is what he
So I'm
said.
not saying we go in there and say, no, we're gonna do this. I say, would you guys be open to listening to us on this?
Because then, at that point, if they say no, then we have to decide what we're going to do
Well,
with
then
that.
we're stuck in a contract. We're stuck in a contract again. Understand contract law.
But
We
let's,
assign
but
something,
let's
we
start
have
with
to-
asking to have a conversation.
Right.
And I think that is,
And I want to hear the result. We want to report back what the result was of that initial contact and any meeting that follows. What the
Yeah,
actual
is that
reaction.
something, do we want to put a time on what we want to report back? Do we want to do it for the next meeting?
I would want to have a report from the next meeting as to progress.
I think it's between now and the next meeting, I can make some progress.
and I think Sid is ideally situated with
Yeah,
other
I-
staff he might want to take with him to open that first door.
That's all we can do. That's all we can do.
That's
Yeah.
all we want to
Slam the
do.
door, that's it. I want to know that.
And Sid, you've been dealing with this contract for a lot longer than us. Can you give us in that meeting as well, or at the next meeting, your assessment of that contract? And how difficult is it going to be for, like, what are our options?
It's a memo, right?
It's a memo, that's
It's
what
a
I, it's
legal
not.
agreement, it's a
Memo
memo.
of understanding is the
It's
same thing.
it's a memo of
But
understanding.
It's a
no-
legal
ending.
memorandum of
But
understanding.
you're saying it's a contract and it's a
Well,
memo of
memorandum of
understanding,
understanding,
so I'd like to know, well, it's, the law's subtle, so I'd
I
like to
think,
know.
I really think to have this discussion and have it done properly, it's going to have to be a lot more than that 1999 memo. There are tons of agreements and they're all different. I know it's gonna come up if we don't address it specifically, watershed protection. That's all an interlocal agreement, that's also shared 50/50. I mean, we're gonna have to open all of this up for discussion through a comprehensive.
Well, this would be the beginning of it.
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend going into this and talking about specifically the 1999 memo, because there are some that go back to the earlier ones that talk about sharing services as well.
Well, maybe I'll amend my motion.
I think we should just open up, I'd like to start out by just opening up formally the discussion process for how things are
I
funded.
second the amendment.
And that was the amendment was what?
Was to include all of the local agreements in the discussion, the initial discussion.
I'll call the question.
Different than
First we
what
have to
Sid
vote
just
on the
said, just to
amendment,
clarify.
and then we have to,
That's different than what you just said, is it?
Dan just called the question.
Well, vote on the amendment first, right?
We vote on the amendment to the motion.
So can you restate the amendment, please?
The amendment was to include all of the local agreements in the initial discussion.
All in favor of the amendment? Passed. Okay. Now, we're back to the discussion of the amended motion.
You want to, you asked me to
Call the question.
He asked to call the question.
Call the
I
question.
just asked the question, and then we're voting, then we come back. That
So-
previous
No,
question was.
He asked now, call the question, is where it's time to vote.
Yes, it is.
So the discussion's over. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, so
All right.
as amended,
Congratulations, everybody.
as amended, we're gonna be checking on the agreements.
We're gonna have an initial contact with Lewis, and I hope we can be involved in it. Staff or the city determined should go with them for the initial meeting. Just discuss it if possible. Thank you.
That's good, but I'll just point out that was a little bit of an offshoot of this, the agenda item, which I would only add before we move on, that this specific contract is something that is approved annually in our budget every year. So my point is that I don't want that to be lost, because we do have, although we're not on this contract specifically, we're not named on it, understood by the interlocal agreement, but we also are we're authorizing funds in our budget process to go to this.
Correct.
So that's my statement, that's all.
Great. Thank you, Trustee. All right. We're moving on. Pipe replacement strategy and options for finance.
Yes, has that been passed out to everybody? Okay, I apologize for not having this in the packet, but there's a lot more here than FBI trying to decipher how to present this information. There was a request
I made my own.
at the meeting to,
That's an agenda packet. Oh, you just got it over there.
I don't know if you're gonna be able to see that.
Oh.
Steve, you get one?
Yes, sorry about that.
Oh, all right, thank
It
you.
was up there with the slide. There's been a lot of discussion the last few months about funding pipe replacement moving forward. Do we bond it? Do we increase rates? How much pipe do we want to put in the ground? Do we increase it? Do we want to keep it as it is? I just wanted to go over a few, I guess just open up this conversation and talk about the advantages of one over the other, and then I'll end up with a recommendation on what I think we should do regarding it. If you go, and as I said, there's always been a lot of conversation about bonding versus straight rate increase. I guess the basic advantages and the other side disadvantages of bonding money. The advantages as a quasi-municipal organization, which we are, we can take it, it's good that we can take advantage of bonding through the state revolving loan fund, the SRF, Maine Municipal Bond Bank, who offers lower interest rates than obtaining bonds on the open market. Obviously, if you bond, you can raise capital quickly to fund projects. It enables us to maintain cash on hand and spread payments over extended periods, typically 10 years. Some of the disadvantages of bonding, and this is something I wanted to really stress here. Despite the low bond rates through the Maine Municipal Bond Bank, the cost of bonding is not as cheap as one might initially think. In addition to the rate, we have to hire bond counsel, and we pay Maine Municipal Bond Bank and DEP administrative fees. If you go to the next slide, can you just quickly, you can't see this, I apologize. It's in your packet though. This is
Will you hold this so I can see it?
yeah, you might have to, but this, every year in the budget, we put this in the budget packet. This is all of our bonds that we owe and the principal and interest. One thing Tanya did is put those bonds in aggregate. Even though we might get a 1%, 2%, some of them are as much as 4%. When you figure in all the fees that go along with administering the bond, we pay 21% on average of the total amount that we pay back is interest and administrative fees. So, bonding is not, it's a lot more than simply the 1 or 2% that we pay in interest. Depending upon what the bond's used for, the repayment can outlive the life of the asset, and we are limited to the size of the bond we can acquire. funds must be spent within a certain timeframe. I think typically, we can go through SRF, it has to be within a year. If we go general bond, it's within a couple of years, so we're limited that way. We do go through SRF, the projects must be engineered, that can increase costs. And last but not least, by charter, we need to get approval from the city of Auburn to approve our bonds, as you all know.
So Sid, when you say it's got to be engineered, that means you got to hire an engineering firm to lay out
Right,
plans, as opposed to you and Mike saying, we can do that ourselves.
That's right, and that drives up the cost.
So let me understand, if we borrow the money, we have to hire outside engineers to,
If you go through the state revolving fund, there are two different types of bonds, I won't get into that, but
We
it
don't
does
have to-
drive up the cost of projects if you bond large capital.
You don't have to go through that.
What's
You
that?
don't have to go through that process.
Well, there are two different, again, I didn't want to bog this down with a different bond situation, but there's the SRF bond, and then there's the general obligation bond. If you go through SRF, which has a better rate, you end up having to go through,
Right. But if you don't,
so if you don't,
you can save a lot of money by going like the city uses.
but that rate is a little higher.
what's the difference?
Right.
And if we bond, we don't get the fire protection increases if we raise our rates to the city of Auburn.
What's that?
We're not gonna get the fire protection increases.
Well, if we're not
that the
raising the
DEC
rates as much,
mandates.
we'll still get it. but-
I mean, if we don't raise our rates, we won't get that part. We won't get that issue with the city, getting a 25% increase in fire protection costs because we raised our rates again.
Well, whether we do it through raising rates or raising a rate because we took out a bond, it's still going to affect the rates. And
It won't
if
affect
it is going to, that would tie into the,
That would affect that. That's another
So
question.
it goes back to Andy's first interest last year. A combination of bonding and raising our interest rates would be a good portfolio.
Raising our rates, not interest rates. Ratepayer rates?
well, if you take out a bond in order to put a project in, it's still going to affect the, I'll be getting into that a little later, what that does. I'll give two different scenarios of what it could do to the rates. So you see here the next one.
What's the difference in rates between what you had said with the higher fees, and then if we didn't use that, what would be the rate difference? So is it 2% versus 4%, 2% versus 10%?
We would have, it all depends on how much you take out and the type of bond you get. You don't really, it's hard to say until you actually get a bond counsel and figure out what that bond is going to be for, because it changes. It's hard to say. In general, if you go through SRF, the rates are lower, but the administration is higher. If you go general, municipal bond bank, the rates are higher, but the administration is not higher.
Right, but we wouldn't be able to use you as opposed to outside engineering and that sort of thing. It would be stay in-house. Those,
Yes, that's essentially yes. But again, if we're going to be putting in another couple of miles of pipe, that might be something we want to have.
it's,
So
we're spreading you thin, is what you're
It
saying.
could be. We might need to hire more people to administer a project like that. So there's a lot of different things. This here is, just shows the fees that do go, the administrative fees that do go into bonds. And that can be 5 or 6%, depending on when you go, whether it's clean water, which is actually the sewer side of things, or drinking water, which is the
And I would ask that you find out what the rate, there's no administrative fee on the market, what the difference is. We don't go with that. SRF.
I do know that this, whether you go SRF or general obligation, is cheaper than open market.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. But just-
So, and one of the other points that you had mentioned to me when we discussed is that we couldn't necessarily spend $10 million in bonds because we couldn't do all that work because we have to coordinate with Public
Correct.
Works and all these.
Right.
So maybe to put it in a project to go arbitrary numbers from 2 to 4 miles in a year for the next, a number that you guys think we could do, like a real concrete, we could actually achieve this in 5 years if we had the money. So it's not an impractical, so it's not a hypothetical, but it's actually a practical, this is what it would cost, so we could say.
That's
That's
what's coming.
Okay, sorry.
Didn't mean that. Yeah,
That's good, that's,
And if we're gonna just move forward by adjusting our rates to accomplish that, the advantages of funding capital through rate adjustment by funding projects through rate adjustment, there's no issuance of long-term debt. Money is used for projects as opposed to repaying interest and fees. In 2020, this year, we're paying with all of our bonds around $135,000 for interest and fees. If no new bonds are issued, the water district will be debt-free in 2034. Can you show the next slide, Sandy? I'll come back to this one. Again, this is our existing bond schedule that is just shown in graphic form. You can see that in the beginning of 2022, you've got almost a $270,000 bond dropping off. You go out into the outer years, the bonds drop. If no new bonds are issued in 2034, we will have no more bond obligation. If you go to our last 2 rate increases we've had, that's sort of the path we're taking, hoping that we can move forward, let these bonds drop off, then we can become more self-sufficient.
I know you, sorry to jump in, but you're using these as advantages, so I have to say, it's not realistic to say that we'll get free, still get pipe replacement, still have a good infrastructure. In 2034, we'll have lots of pipe that's bad. And the rates will be adjusted down, I don't believe that. It may
Well,
stabilize.
the potential.
Right, stabilize and not go up as much, but then, we don't have that 100.
I guess the point is, if you compare that against bond, you're locked in paying that bond.
That's right, I understand that.
So that's the point I was trying to make.
And the point I want to make is it's not clear that we'd be able to have any sort of pipe replacement. It makes sense. Even though we're debt free, we still got 20 to 30 miles of bad pipe in 2034.
Well, and again, the disadvantages of funding capital through rate adjustment. In order to increase funds for capital projects, new rates may have to be in effect for a year or more to build up adequate reserves to take on more capital improvements. As we're doing this year, we put the rate increase in place. It's not going to take effect until next year because we don't have it takes a while to build up that capital to utilize it. The other disadvantage, current ratepayers would be funding long-term improvements. Short-term water customers may not enjoy the benefit of the investment through the pay. Go ahead. One more. Oh, there we go. Scenario 1. What I did, we put together a couple of, I mean, there's a million ways you can look at this. We tried to put together 2 scenarios that could be seen as possibly reasonable. I mean, you can look at all kinds of different rate increases to do different things, but these 2 scenarios that we have I have a goal. If you want to eliminate the remaining cast iron pipe that we have in the ground, the bad cast iron pipe, we've got roughly 15 miles of that pipe still in the ground. If we wanted to replace that, say we wanted to replace that in 6 years. Of course, once that's done, we're going to be moving into the cement line cast iron pipe, which is not as urgent to replace, but in 6 years, if the cast iron's gone, that's what we're gonna be targeting. Another assumption, right now when we budget for pipe, as Mike mentioned earlier, we budget $100 a foot. If we're gonna be increasing our pipe, I would conservatively want to estimate it's gonna be $200 a foot, because we're going to be getting ahead of our schedule now. We'd be replacing pipe and roads that the city to necessarily not to go in and construct, so we would need to do full restoration of the trench, paving and everything. And the remaining cast iron that's left are in places that are not going to be all that easy to replace. So if we assume $200 a foot, we'll need an additional $600,000 per year in order to replace an additional half mile of pipe a year. As you know, we're currently funded to replace 2 miles a year. One thing that's going to help us, as you saw from that bond chart beginning in 2022, the bond drop of $275,000, that'll allow us to put an additional quarter mile of pipe in the ground. If we were going to do this through a straight rate increase, we need a 15% rate increase to accomplish this. If we did that, we could replace 2.5 to 3 miles per year, year after year, in perpetuity. If we were going to do the same thing by bonding in the next 6 years, we need to take out right now a $3.6 million bond. That would raise rates 12%, as opposed to 15% by just raising the rate without a bond. We would incur $700,000 in interest and fees over the 10-year life of that bond. And once that bond is spent, we would be reverting back to replacing 2 miles a year, or we need to take out an additional bond. So,
Sid, that
Yep.
that $700,000 in interest and fees over 10 years,
yeah,
that would amount to $200 a foot. That's 2/3 of a mile of pipe.
right.
Just on inch, would lose 2/3 of a mile of pipe exactly,
Right.
paying that $700.
So 700,000 over 10 years is 70,000 a year.
But still, it's
Tell me how
that's
that
still
equates.
2/3 of a mile of pipe.
How does that equate? to
That because
2/3 of a mile?
we wouldn't be paying that $700,000 if we did with the rate increase.
No, I'm just
That's
saying
money that could be used for pipe
$70,000 in interest, and it costs $500,000.
It's just 700,000.
That's over 10 years.
Right, but still,
That's
no matter
$700,000
what, at $200 a foot, it's
Why are we
still
even
2/3
considering
of a mile.
200 a foot, twice as much? Why can't we just increase our pipe in the road a little bit, just to try to get through the next couple of years? We just had a 14.9% rate increase. We're gonna have another 14 or 12% rate increase? And we're gonna double the cost per foot? Because I'm not convinced that we have to do 2 miles a year. Why not 1.5 miles? We talked about these different scenarios a year ago.
Well, I brought it up because I want to know if, when we're talking about, as a city, growing downtown, increasing the number of, houses, and how do we grow the city? And when we say that we've got this bad pipe, we've got water main breaks, I mean, I don't know how much the water main breaks cost us last year in maintenance. What number is that? Is that in ballpark number? How much does that cost the city, cost the department?
Well, every year I don't have the budget in front of me, but every year it's under our maintenance budget. We've never gone over that. I don't know if, off the top of my head, I don't know exactly what that number is. But the point is, you want to avoid breaks.
Yeah.
When you have a water main break, it's costly. I mean, it's something you don't want to happen.
So my question for Sid was, is there a way we can get rid of the old bad pipe faster? And is there a less expensive way to the ratepayer if we bonded it versus, raising rates?
If you go to the next one, The next sheet is, it's ramping that up even a little more, just for illustrative purpose. If we were to replace the remaining 15 miles in 5 years as opposed to 6 years, we would need to raise an additional $1.2 million per year of revenue if we were going to replace an additional mile of pipe every year. If we were going to do that, go down a few lines, we need a straight 31% rate increase.
You mean annually, 31% every year? When you say straight, or what do you mean by just?
No, if we were just going to put an additional mile of pipe in a year, we would need to do a 31% rate increase in order to do that. When I say straight, it's like that not bond.
That's not bond, yeah,
That's a
without the bond.
one time, right now, 31% rate increase.
So we couldn't do it without bond.
Sid,
If,
and this is assuming that $200 a foot,
yes,
because we're digging up a street that the city is not
correct,
rehabbing.
correct. It's a conservative estimate, but,
Whereas if the city was rehabbing, redoing the streets, the cost per foot would be substantially lower.
yes.
Okay.
Yep, that's fair to
Just want
say.
to get that.
Like, did we replace all the pipe on Poland Road?
Yep. Yep, we did.
So if we coordinated with the city, we knew,
We do that.
Which
The issue is the city,
Same money.
if the city accelerated their street replacement strategy, if we did this, we'd be getting ahead of them, because we try to work together so we're not one's too far ahead of the other. You know, if the city all of a sudden decided they're going to be replacing, 5 miles of road a year, then that would tie into the strategy and reduce our costs.
What is that number right now?
What the city's doing?
Well, say you're getting ahead of them, what is the number where we meet them?
Right now, it's,
1.5, what we're doing now?
yeah.
And most of the pipe replacement we've done has been coordination.
Because
It kinda goes
We
in-
did Minot Avenue last year.
Right.
And we did all the pipes under that. This year is Poland Road. Who knows what next year is, although Sid probably does already know.
It was Lake
what the
Street,
city's
you know.
thinking
Well,
about.
but
my other question was, is if we borrow the money and we use the borrowed money to replace the pipe, we're not spending our cash, we should have a pile of cash.
Well, we have the employees, so that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up too, was we have a significant number of our employees that are putting pipe in there. So,
Just to round out this scenario, if we were gonna put an additional mile of pipe in the ground and bond it as opposed to having a 31% rate increase, we would need a $7.2 million bond. That's the amount we need to take out in order to do that. We'd raise our rates 25% in order to pay for that bond, as opposed to the 31%.
if we did it all in 1 year,
Right.
but I'm not saying we replaced 15 miles of pipe in 1 year.
No, that would be an additional.
5 years.
5 years. We do it in 5 years. These are equivalent scenarios. If we did that, if we took out a $7.2 million bond
Over 5 years, over 6 years.
right now, took it out right now in order to replace pipe over the next 5
Well, we
years.
would do that.
What's that?
We wouldn't take out the whole loan now, extend it over 5 years.
This is just a
I know,
scenario.
but we borrow as we needed it, so we.
I got something that I think we're biting off a lot for this meeting. We've got an agenda,
Yeah.
we've got a lot more stuff on this
Well,
agenda.
this is the day we have a chance to absorb this and bring it
Yeah,
up.
bring it home,
Yeah.
pick it back up next meeting.
Emailed this to us at 8:15 this morning.
Yeah,
I don't usually check email in the morning, this is.
No, that's okay, so I think this is a lot, I don't know, as the president, to table this agenda item to the next,
I move
Well,
we
it's not,
table this.
not table, it's just to bring it up for discussion at the next meeting.
the next meeting, so let's move, we got a second?
A second.
We vote to table this till, move on? So we're on to, thank you, Sid.
Yep, sure, yep, just, I know it's a lot of stuff, but I just.
Is
wanna make
everybody
sure-
all in
All
favor?
in favor?
Okay. So, thank you, Sid.
Sure.
I appreciate you putting that together, but I think, given the time constraints we've got.
Yeah.
The review of the bylaws for the protection of Lake Auburn committee. Development of board approved charge to the committee.
I have a suggestion for this. I think that Dan and Jason and I had a very productive first kind of informal meeting, and I was not able to attend the second informal meeting. I would like to suggest for our consideration that before we go into the full authorization of the committee, that the board authorize Dan and Jason and me to work as, I believe the official term would be a task force or a work group, and be ready by the next meeting here to bring you several pieces of, I think, essential consideration so that the committee will succeed. One is some draft language for the charge. One is some basic action steps of how how our work will be implemented. And that way, when you look at and how, with some of the building blocks in the timeline, so that when we officially vote on the formation of the committee plus its charge, that the three of us in this informal way will have prepared these materials. They'll be well thought out amongst the three of us, and that way, and I think I would like to suggest that Sid be part of that conversation since he's so knowledgeable. So it'd be the three trustees and a superintendent, draft the language for the charge, draft the action steps to implement that charge, and a timeline, so that we are in accord for this committee, which I think is essential, has to have a really good foundation to the committee. I think Jim did an extremely good job of reminding us that there are enormous numbers of stakeholders in this. And if we cannot be hasty in forming it, so it's like building the foundation for this work. So that would be my motion, that the three of us form a short-term task force to draft the charge, draft the action steps, and bring them back to, and the timeline, and bring them back to this board for board approval at the August meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion.
Just, my only thought was, in reviewing the update for the bylaws, it specifically says the trustees, the very end game, it should be the trustees that make the decision.
Absolutely, but we need professional assistance from the superintendent to help
Okay,
us
let's
get
sit.
information.
And then my second question is to Sid, does he have the time, and how much time would you have, let's say, every 2 weeks? We'd like to meet at least once every 10 days for maybe 2 hours, somewhere in the watershed. Is that time frame, is that okay with you?
Yeah, I serve the board.
Okay. And then I'll turn the rest of my time over to Jason.
I would take a slightly different approach respectfully. I think that in the document, trustees are required to review this every 5 years. I don't know the history exactly of when it was last
10 years ago.
But I think the charge should be more simple to start, that we are trustees, all of us, to review. And my approach personally would be to use something that we use for the job evaluation that we performed, where we all provided input, questions, comments. Those were consolidated, and the outliers were removed. We addressed the questions and comments that were consensus items. It'll save us all a lot of time. Personally, I think meeting is good. The two meetings that we had, one with Mary and one with the three of us, the two of us were informative for me just to read through it. But we all need to do our homework. We all should be reviewing this. And it would be my request that the committee, that we not wait on giving the committee a specific charge. We give the charge now to vote down Mary's motion and reintroduce, or friendly amendment maybe would be the right term, to let the committee begin the charge to review, with the process to collect comments from each individual trustee, compile them, review them with Sid to iron out the questions, the outliers, remove those. 'Cause that's a waste of
So
time.
like an emailing to the,
Email or in person, I could meet
Right.
with Bob and we could go through his questions. He may already know what, maybe give me a call and say, here, write this down, or you could, Mary could, we could, you know,
I'd like
whoever.
to speak to why I think we need a few more steps than that, Jason.
Okay.
I appreciate your thinking on it. But let's be clear here. 10 years ago, the trustees did review this document. Not one of us has seen the review that was done 10 years ago.
I've seen it.
One person here has seen what was done 10 years ago.
I can provide that to the
So-
rest.
Well, but wait a minute here. I mean, this is how you build a responsible, respectful process that is extremely well informed. Every step of this process will have legal review. And we should start at the beginning of knowing that there are a lot of legal stakeholders in the bylaws to protect the lake. So this is not a round-robin environment here. Getting the questions identified is something that a good start was done, the trustees having their questions. But I think without having a clear roadmap of how we're going to study this process, unless we're just tweaking here or tweaking there, but if this is going to be a thorough review, then let's get the groundwork built for how you do a comprehensive review in a thoughtful way and the timeline in which it can be done. And I think that the responsibility of our board as trustees is to get every one of the action steps in place so that this board can then vote on what the review process will entail, what the benchmarks are, and how it will function in a responsible way so that we don't get, at the end of the day, a process that cannot sustain either public scrutiny or legal review. And I think too quickly moving in this is in fact very unlikely to be successful in addressing important questions that I agree need to be addressed. And none of that has been done yet. We haven't even really thought about it. It just came about and it's off and running, and I was told that it had to be done in 4 months. Now that's not how this board of trustees should handle its business.
To go to the trustees in 4 months.
We're not ready. We don't even know what we're working on and how it fits in, to a larger process. And until we do, we know. I mean, I've actually really spent a lot of time researching where anything but a few tweaks will go. After say we find something that whatever we think the trustees have agreed to, or at least 4 or more. And our lawyer agrees, because then it has to have legal review, and say that there's any dispute in the community about it. We have to have public hearings. We have to expect challenges. The PUC has standing, the main drinking water program has standing, and we have not yet blocked out how you create a responsible process to review these bylaws. And I urge us to build that foundation so we vote knowledgeably on how we're conducting this review. We can do this right, and we can do it in a solid way in which the full roadmap is what every trustee is voting on before we hit the start button for a properly formed committee that everybody knows what we're getting into. I think we got off to an improper but well-intended start, and the informal review of these bylaws that Jason and Dan did, I decided that my best role was to just take a look and make sure we were on the right track, because I knew the process was not yet properly launched, but we can do this right, and when we do, we will be successful, and that's what I'm encouraging us to do for long-term success. And that's why I would not entertain a friendly emotion. You're welcome to vote me down, but I encourage you to consider not voting me down.
My
Any
initial
discussion on
goal is
Mary's
just to
motion?
have all the trustees up to date, like Jason, Mary, and myself are, as far as reading the
They
document
will be.
and having an
After
opportunity.
we get ourselves all organized, the next step will be the items that you two both have identified. But let's put it in a context of the package of how the process works before we vote on this committee, which is not yet formed. And please, that is the right way to do this business, and we will be glad for it.
And I'll just add my 2 cents only because I've been involved in a lot of public policy for a while. And people don't know what's going on now, but once they get word of what's going on, you are gonna have scrutiny. And it may be that public hearing is when you're gonna get the most scrutiny. And if we can't back up our process, this is how we did it, this is why we recommend X, Y, Z. They're gonna think it's something other than a process, a cronyism or whatever it is they're gonna be afraid of. We need to have a process that is legal and defendable. And so I mean, as much as I hate to see the process slow down,
One
I
meeting.
think we absolutely have to make sure we have that charge in place, and this committee follows that charge.
And the three of us, I think.
Nothing will get changed, otherwise we'll work at the end of the 6 months from now, and then a public hearing will get voted down, or it won't happen.
We'll get
Like
bashed.
the last time, they couldn't agree. They tried to do it 10 years ago, and they couldn't come up with any way to change it, because they couldn't agree on what to do to change it. I don't want to see
They're the
the
same
end.
way either way, we get to the same way, but.
But I think as far
Let's go ahead.
But I'm not saying that we can't, the information that anybody has opinions cannot be still, can those go emails? I mean,
But let's do it right.
compiling the information should be going on. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I mean, I think the three of us can meet, and with Sid, can meet to plot this out and bring you a professionally prepared process, timeline, action statement, draft of the charge, and you can, all of us collectively as trustees, can vote on the whole package.
Yep.
And then,
Or
and
change
every,
or amend any portion of it thereof. as we vote
it's
on
a
the-
draft.
I agree.
People,
Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion on the table. Can you read the motion back? You have a motion.
I do. If you can read it, or why I don't remember it.
Quite a while ago.
To create a task force to draft charge, action steps, and timeline, and bring back to the board in August.
Okay?
That's my motion. Absolutely. Thank you, Ty.
It's been seconded. All in favor? All opposed? Unanimous, Mary?
Thank you. And Sid will join us, and we will meet in public. I mean, these are public,
Once we start doing this, we'll be, we'll have to make good.
this is all going to be public. It has to be. We already have people who are watching
Okay.
these meetings.
Good. That item is done.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, now we're on to LawPAC Commission Board appointment, discussion and process to fill a vacancy. We've got a vacancy.
We do. Bethel Shields, who is the one of the current commissioners, her term expires this month. Our next meeting is in September. She has indicated she's not going to be seeking to be reappointed. So we need to discuss how we are going to fill that vacancy. I think I put a copy in your packet of the board-approved policy that was approved last June 19th by the Water District trustees. There's a 4-step process for getting someone seated. So I don't know if anyone wanted revisions to that policy, or if we're just good to go ahead and fill that vacancy in accordance with the policy.
I actually suggest that we get rid of the nominating committee. I think it was the way many things work, but it didn't work here, and there's no reason to have tried it.
Is that a motion?
Yes, I move
Second.
we
Is there any
maintain the
other
policy.
changes to one motion? Any other
Yeah, I
changes
wasn't
you guys-
quite ready to make my motion. I was ready to say, I think I'm going to propose we get rid of the nominating committee.
If that's a motion,
I move we eliminate the nominating committee from the board
Step
approved
2.
process.
So that's step 2. You want to eliminate step 2.
Step
Is
two,
that- Who's in your pack?
Every place that it says nominating committee, it will be stricken from the policy.
And the word "the board" in place of the.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. So I move that we eliminate the nominating committee in all places in the process where it is stated, and that the word "the board" is replacing it in the process, the full board.
So actually, what we can do, that's what, yes.
Second for discussion, we've already got it.
Yep, we got a second.
So
it's
really,
decided.
step 3 is entirely removed as well, the entire step 3, because there's nobody except the president and Sid maybe accepting applications. There's no committee to review, there's no identifying candidates, no compilation. So that's entire step 2 and 3 are gone.
Well, no, step 3 is.
That's gonna happen here.
Right, that'll be, accept applications until deadline, that'll be the board.
We keep that, yeah.
The board will meet and review and discuss applicants, as opposed to the nomination. And then identifies the most qualified candidate. Well, that part won't be,
Composition
So it's-
committee, the whole, yeah.
So functionally, let's talk about function. Are we just gonna get, if we get 10 people, we bring 10 people and we review 10 applications
Yep.
sitting here
we do it in
And then
executive session.
Executive session.
in executive session?
Yep.
And at which point, as a group, we put out however many of those 10 people that we think need to be voted, and then they get voted on
Yep,
You know,
in open session.
correct.
What's the deadline right up to the day we meet in August?
I don't know what the deadline would be.
Just something to think about. I mean,
Let's
we're
establish,
all
should
gonna
probably
just-
establish a deadline.
Because the next commission meeting is
September.
19th or
So in
something?
August, this will be an agenda
August,
item.
September,
And if we can't do it in August, there's gonna be one less person until we get somebody appointed, right?
Yeah, that's what happened last year.
And this happened last year too, so if we couldn't get somebody appointed for our September meeting, that just means that the lot time will be minus one person until we get.
our next meeting's the 19th.
September 9th is the next commission meeting.
I don't think.
If the general public.
So the only meeting, we're gonna have is next August.
We're gonna have to post it.
We're gonna need applicants, and so the public's gonna need to know that it's an open position. I don't know how that works.
We posted on the city's
Well,
website
talk to
last
people.
time.
If you've got somebody you think would be good,
You know,
so.
Our website.
our website and Facebook or.
The application's on the website. It doesn't specifically say any deadline for this particular.
Well,
So
it should.
as long as they're to us by our August meeting, then we can appoint them for September
As long
9th.
as we have, if we have a deadline that
applications.
says by the day before our August meeting,
Yep.
we can
Yeah.
try that and see if we can get enough
Yeah.
applicants. before
Can we
the-
receive information as it comes in,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
so that
Yeah,
we're not
just
holding
have
it up
some-
until the meeting, we can get it as soon as it comes in, and that way we can.
Forward all the applicants around.
Yeah, as you get an applicant, send it out to the board, to the trustees.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, as long as we can get it done, I guess we, yeah.
And then we'll have an executive session
If you
before
have
our
like
next
that.
meeting. We'll review applicants,
Yep,
and whichever ones we want to put forward that people want to nominate, I guess we'd have to have a nomination process
well,
as a
then you
group.
just nominate from the floor. I nominate
Yeah.
Joe
Right.
Small. Now, the one thing we did last year as a board is that we interviewed people. And we had every candidate who was serious, we asked them, we interviewed them at the nominating committee. And, you know, if that's not done, I would encourage us to consider doing that because, in fact, we had questions, you know, it was interesting how people handle interview questions. An application form only goes so far to
That's what
revealing
the application looks like.
the interests and the background and the point of view that someone had, and I thought it was interesting how people, if we're making an informed selection.
So we want to invite applicants to a trustee meeting.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest, that we interview people.
We should make delay it.
I would
Definitely
definitely.
But I
So
would-
is that an
but I would-
amendment?
But I would delay it to make sure you get the right person.
What you said.
I mean, these are important positions, so I would amend my own, could I amend my own?
Well, that could be a separate event.
A separate vote, okay. So my
Can we do
motion,
that? Can we
First
do
one
that
was-
in
first one
executive
was-
session
okay,
before the next meeting as part of, because we're gonna have the information ahead of time, I hope. That's the plan, to get it as it comes in. We'll have time to, a week or so before, if anybody has specific questions, to have those asked,
Well-
and they can respond to us.
We need to go and let's get this question out of the way first.
yeah, can I call my own question?
Yes, you can.
I call a question on my motion, which was to eliminate the nominating committee and have the full board function in its stead.
Okay, we had a second to that. All in favor of that,
Yes.
say aye. Okay, good, we're on to that. Good,
Now,
that's
as far
done.
as Jason's comment, I think what he's trying to say is we have an executive session, but first we may put open session up ahead of the executive session.
If they
It
would
would
like to
allow
speak.
any person that wanted to speak, that put that application, could speak to the full
Oh,
board.
that's a good one.
Then we go into executive session.
With only one other comment, just that as the applications come in, if we get them instantly, we can respond with questions to these two, and they can process them within a week or a few days before, just say, here are some questions, or do you think that's too?
That has to happen during the executive session.
Okay.
So,
There's a privacy thing here.
so our executive session is gonna happen, our executive session would then happen after open session.
Right, you move the open session up, and then you have an executive session, or however you want to arrange it.
Whatever, we have an open session, so we can have after that an
Right.
executive session in there that we're gonna evaluate. And anybody that's an applicant has the opportunity to come here
During open session.
during
and
open
address
session
the board.
and address the board.
I think that would be a good way.
I think that's a good process.
And we would actively invite the candidates.
Well, make sure it's on all the,
So that-
Right.
so that you will have the opportunity to speak to the board should you desire.
You're invited
The night of our
to, yeah.
Yeah,
And do it early enough in the meeting so that they know.
We
Yeah,
should
so they don't have to
do it at the
wait
beginning of the
10
meeting,
after
so
about
that-
4,
yeah.
you know, you get your chance to speak.
Yeah, so
That's why I
maybe
said
on
we
that
go up
About an
month,
hour and a half later.
we'll move the open session to the beginning of to the very
Right.
first item
Right.
of the meeting, with executive session to follow, and then our standard, we'll come out of that, we'll vote who's gonna be the appointee to the committee, to the commission, and then we'll move on with the regular business.
Yeah.
There you go. Good.
Also, our nominating process, I think Mary was starting to talk about it, the way we did it is with multiple candidates, you have to follow a specific process, so you start on the list, and then number 1, nomination vote, number 2, nomination.
Yeah, I will
Until
share
somebody
with
is-
you the
that should
exact
be included.
procedure. We already paid Jim Cross once for this.
Yeah,
I will
We should
share with you
learn from that.
the official way we got coached and how to do it properly with multiple candidates. Because there's no reason to pay him twice.
That's
In executive session.
No, out of executive.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
we're actually-
But I'll share with you the emails that detail it out.
yeah.
Pay for it once, it's,
Okay.
Very good.
no redundancy.
Good, so are we done with this agenda item?
So that'll be
Just a
posted.
note for staff to send out the updated expiration dates of the commissioners and trustees, so that'd be superintendent, clerk of Law Pack, so we have an idea on the board, because there's a question too that I have. Mine at Hebron and Buckfield is supposed to alternate every year, but we've only had one candidate.
Yeah, they've never, the other 2 towns have never shown any interest in having someone. But last year, we made an effort to make sure everyone's nomination was updated, so, you know, we got Steve French, Dick Thibodeau, they've
Okay.
got approval from the towns.
All right.
I was just asking to be sure how soon can it be posted, is it tomorrow, is that possible? Just
Sure, it's on the website now, we can just add some verbiage to that about the deadline for submission.
Great. So that brings us to, I'd say, water quality update. Sid, is there anything to worry about?
Nope, we did complete our lead and copper testing. We passed that with flying colors, which is really good. I did include in your packet, I didn't get a chance to read it, but I put a little information report that was put out there by DEP. They were warning that this year could be a very high likelihood for algae blooms, given the record heat and drought conditions we had. This was written earlier in the month. Also, to keep our lakes healthy, we need to make sure we're reducing the amount of phosphorus entering our lakes. I mean, this is something you all have heard, but I just wanted to put that out there. This has been published. And, right now, the lake is looking good. All of our parameters are good. Turbidity is low. Phosphorus is healthy numbers. Septic weeds are still good. is this time of year. As they always say, time will tell, but right now the lake is healthy. I do believe the algae treatment we did last summer and fall did help improve the long-term health of the lake. So we're looking good right now.
Great. Thank you, Sid. Project updates, is there?
I'll keep it very brief. The Holly Street replacement's done, Jocelyn's done, Fern is prepped and will begin in about 2 weeks. We're going to be working on Rochelle in winter in August as well. So those projects are ongoing, and we'll have more to report next month. Should have specific questions.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody have any questions? Projects, okay. Health insurance update?
Yep, just want to mention that it's in your packet again under the memo. Good news on our health insurance. As you know, we have our insurance is through Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield. This year we did participate in a balance funded product which is partially self-funded. At the end of 12 months, if there are programs running in the black, we share 50% of the cost savings. They give us a report at mid-year. Right now, we do have a surplus of $27,456.
Wow.
So that's really good. That could, it's good news now, but we are a small organization, so hopefully we can remain healthy, and that will be a good thing for
Excellent. Thank you. That's it for new business. On to old business, request for payment in lieu of taxes from the mayor.
Yep, this was an item that was tabled, but let's go and we brought it up at this meeting.
You have to make a motion to get it off the table.
Nope,
No, it's on
we did a date certain.
It's on the
Right.
agenda, right?
Back
So,
on.
I know there's been some talk about potentially some studies. Sid, if you
Yeah,
talk-
one thing that I did, and it's in your packet, I did reach out to other utilities, seeing if they had similar requests. Stuff with Augusta, Bangor, Brunswick, Kennebec Water District, and Montfort Wells, Maine Water Company, Portland Water District. The only one that came back that said they did something like that was the Portland Water District. They own a number of water districts around the Portland area. Years ago, they did end up acquiring the town of Gorham Water District, and they do pay them annually $2,150 annually. That was done at time of acquisition. I'm not sure that can be considered a pilot or not. That was the only
One time, or
annually.
we may suggest to negotiate, taking a piece of land or something. Like
Well, when they took over their entire system, I think that was to pay them for the infrastructure, but that was considered at the time
So it's a
of.
negotiating item.
Only a couple other had been even asked about it. Brunswick Thompson said they had been requested a long time ago by one town, but they were denied because they just weren't making for a tax exempt organization. But no, to my, these are the larger utilities in the state. That's most information.
Anybody else have any comment?
Personally, I do. I think that we should turn it around into a positive cooperation. Put out an olive branch and say, hey, we'd like to work with you, rather than consider some sort of a fee or penalty, or we'd like to work with you and try to come up with some type of a study, an economic impact study that is in our mutual interest to have these discussions kind of opened in the way that it seems like the mayor would like to have, and some of the council. So I'd ask, personally, I'd ask Steve if you could turn that around and see what his opinion would be on that. The council would have to approve any kind of joint study, but rather than looking at other districts and fees they may have paid or payment in lieu of, what if other districts, have they ever partnered with an independent district and partnered with the local government to say, here, let's fund partially a study for you covering, hopefully they're covering the majority of it, but contributing to something that will benefit us mutually.
So what I'll do is I'll talk.
But wait, I want to hear what Andy has to say.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you were saying
Yeah,
something.
they can't just go do that. We have to talk about it as a board.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, my concern about this, first of all, is that payment in lieu of taxes is a popular thing. When you have, say, a college or university or something in an area that uses city services but pays zero taxes. So the study would be complicated, and okay, the watershed, the land you're protecting, what does that cost the city, aside from taxes that are collected? That's not an argument you're gonna win, because it's a statewide law. Every nonprofit in the state doesn't pay property taxes, so we're going against the tide there. So I think that a study would be almost impossible to be able to know what value there is there. A token, see, this board wants to say, okay, we'll throw them $5,000 a year, but we can't do it this year anyway. It's gotta be something we incorporate in our budget for next year, because the money's not in this year's budget, especially with COVID. The last thing you do is come up with any kind of money to give to anybody, because you feel like. So we gotta talk about it between now and the end of the budget season, and then I don't think we don't want to spend a lot of money on studies, because that can get very complicated. I mean, I know the police sometimes will patrol Lake Auburn, so you need to key to them, the police officer that patrols Lake Auburn on the watershed, make sure that if people are hearing, okay, that's one thing I'd look at.
We do.
If we're doing that, then that really, we're already paying for whatever service that we are getting from the city in the watershed. Now, in lieu of taxes, I mean, I just don't see if there's any way you can justify it. And as much as I'd like to see the city of Auburn get more revenue, it's one pocket of the ratepayers of the city.
I would like to suggest that before we jump into yet another cut here, that we see where we can get with conversations about the interlocal agreements. I mean, that's a very, very big project. If we hear an open door from our sister city, we are going to be very busy trying to work in the right way on what those agreements should look like. And we really don't know yet any one step of the way. We're going to know more in a month. Additionally, we are undertaking the first in 10 years in a review of the bylaws for the protection of the land. And if there's agreement, as we affirm how we're going to work on that by the August meeting, that is also a very big piece of work. And additionally, we're trying to understand how we can pay for pipes with the possibility of a mix of rates and bonds, or maybe more to bonds. And additionally to that, if we haven't noticed, our revenues are down. And they're not just down due to COVID. They're down every year right now. We are selling less water. And we haven't paid as much attention to, my view, the macro big picture of some of these trends before we get into more money going here, more money going there. We've got a lot to work on, a year's worth of hard work for trustees. And as a city taxpayer, I am also extremely, of course, concerned about revenues to the city. Of course we all are. Every single one of us is a city taxpayer, and we all got on this board the exact same way, appointed by a city council. And I would propose that we respectfully, and I do mean respectfully, let the city know that we are unable to transfer revenues out of our current account to support the city's needs. And what we are working on, in the spirit of what Jason's asking for, I think we are trying to respect what the city has asked for us, of us. Maybe not in the identical way, but if we can make progress with some of these other questions, then I would suggest the communication back to the mayor, the city council, and the city manager is that we cannot agree to a payment in lieu of taxes, and that we are, in the spirit of full partnership, working on, taking the steps to try to open the door to interlocal agreement discussions and looking at the bylaws for the protection of Lake Auburn. And that is our affirmation of the positive relationship that we, I believe, all want to have with all the parties that represent the city.
No interlocal agreement has to do with, there's a lot of land in the watershed that's really owned by Lewiston, right? Isn't it a 50-50 deal there?
Yeah.
So we got that. Now there's an agreement with the airport that talks about that. Some of that land is owned by Lewiston, but it's in Auburn.
That may
We
come
get-
up in our
and we-
conversation.
And we get something for that. We, in lieu of
So-
taxes, we get something.
So
So
is
that
it
could be a
cons-
good example to look at and see if this is something we
So
should.
we're in consensus that it's a no.
Like it,
It's a no, but we want to, but not a respectful no in that we want to continue our positive move forward as working together. We've got a lot on the table and we think we're going to bring value to what the city's doing.
And to our partnership.
Okay, consensus?
And,
I move that, I make a motion. Sorry.
and also that we look forward to budgeting in the future or in our next rate increase, the possibility of including something, but we can't do it just out of regular.
Correct.
I say that, I mean, we can't do anything until our next budget.
And we're not ruling it out.
One of the things that Andy said before is something that may come up is, let's plan ahead for filtration studies, for talking about things like that. That's what where some of this is coming from. So I don't think we want to just say, no, we're
Right.
not interested in talking about these things. We're interested in talking.
I think Casey
But
had
we
a good
just-
point.
Yeah.
We just have to wait till the next budget season.
I think I can, that's the message I'll bring to the mayor.
I make a motion that includes all these problems.
I don't think we need a motion or I think
Well,
it's
I'm
a
okay with
discussion and
consensus.
Okay.
because I'm good with going and bringing the message to the mayor and of
Thank you.
conciliation or whatever you want, of good spiritedness, of working together.
And it's actually always been that way.
Yes.
I would like to say on the record and with the video running, I mean, I'll start with Sid and his staff, enormous credit. I mean, when you talk about how we work with the city, we work on streets that they want to tear up so that we're not tearing up streets that they don't want to tear up. And that's not new.
No.
And I have a deep respect for all the work that this board has done over all the years that predate me. Because it's always been with the public spirit and the well-being of this community in mind. And never has it been anything but that, nor differences of opinion sometimes among some elected persons or some trustees. But it's never been the case that this board has sought to have an antagonistic relationship with any of the communities that we serve. And I want to make sure on record that I am at least one. I am a few months away from completing my service here, and I will be forever grateful. I'm not saying goodbye yet, but as I begin, and I'm going to make the motion to adjourn in a minute, but I want to say something about how we will work together. And it is not the good old days one day, the bad old days the other. We'll get nowhere that way. And now I make a motion that we adjourn.
Oh, this is going to reject that.
Open session.
Open session. Well, that was my trustee open
That was our
session.
trustee open session.
And now
Oh, I see that down there, right, I'm sorry. Trustee open session.
I'm done.
Mary just did hers. Anybody else?
Steve, were you going to mention the study that the city's contemplating? Have we talked about that?
Yeah, and I'm not prepared to do it. Honestly, again,
It's late. We
it's
all
late,
need
my
some-
brain is fried, honestly, I'm done.
Future agenda item,
Love to
Dave?
hear about it next time.
For the
For
city.
the cost study thing?
Yeah, there is a cost study thing, and I think what Phil would like to do is sit down with you, with, I think Andy, right? Well, you mentioned, you're gonna mention this to Andy.
Yeah.
You wanted,
Yeah,
it was your idea.
yeah, I think that, yeah, sit down and talk about what they're talking about. You know,
Yeah.
Face-to-face meeting, what do you ask when I saw that?
Along the lines of what Mary's saying, in
You need
a
to first
full
understand
disclosure,
what
we
it
work
is.
together.
Just so everyone knows, the city manager, Phil Pearl, told me on August 17th, there's going to be an Auburn City Council workshop to talk about the cost of water service. And he said there's been a few discussions back and forth with a few people, but I just didn't get a lot of information about that. But I'm curious where that came from, where it's going, or what it entails. I really.
So I mean, that's why we get the parties together and
That's what,
totally understand what that is. Because I don't know
Yeah, and I don't,
what the goals
I
are.
don't know what it is right now.
Well, we look forward to hearing about it, Andy, after you can report back to us.
Absolutely will, as long as I'm not setting up the meeting, I assume you would set that.
I'll talk to.
It's almost like a who's on first type of meeting.
Well, I mean,
I'm not,
He's the
honestly,
city councilor, he's also the,
honestly, with everything else that's been going on in this board for the last month, that got pushed out.
it's all right, we still have time. They want to.
Plus all the other stuff I've got going on.
It's a fun job.
Well. Did we have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Good.
Second.
All in favor? Okay.